Dear church, let's talk about facing trials. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. I'm joined by my co-host, Jake Sledge, and we have a very special guest with us today, Chase Turner, all the way from Monroe, Louisiana. Chase, thank you so much for joining us. And Chase is going to be the one, no pressure, but kind of kicking off our new podcast series called Good Grief. And the idea behind this series is kind of getting through what you're going through. And we're going to talk about some of life's greatest challenges and how to get through them with God on our side. And so we're talking about stress on this podcast episode, and then we'll be talking about loss of an unborn child, a miscarriage. We'll be talking about losing a spouse and, losing a small child. We'll be talking about all those things in this series and how to get through that with faith. And so we're letting you, Chase, kind of kick us off here, and we appreciate you joining us. We also want to plug your book that came out recently called T.R.I.A.L.S. And if you could hold that up there, if you got one. I've got the digital copy, so that's why I don't have one to hold up. But Chase, tell us a little bit about the book and what kind of inspired it.
First, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to visit with you guys, and especially about this topic, something dear to me. But I'll start with my family. My lovely wife, Kristen, and I have been married 13 years. We have 4 children, ages 11, 8, 7, and 3. And like I said, we live here in Monroe, Louisiana, and I work in a full-time Spanish ministry. And so from understanding stresses of others, I definitely get a lot of that coming to me from them. But before we did that, I started teaching a series of lessons on how to deal with stress and anxiety, and really defining those two terms and how they affect us in every single area of life.
Sure.
And put my notes together to give away to people. Really had no idea that it would turn into a book. Had my dad edit it for me, and he said, you really ought to submit that to some publishers. I think that's really good. And he loves me, but he wouldn't fluff me up like that. And so I did. I submitted, and somebody jumped on it, and they made a book out of it. And it's been a lot of fun to see the way that it's helped people and people's reactions to the book, and even some constructive criticism that I've given thought to, and helped me kind of rethink some of the things that I thought about in relationship to the topic.
Sure. So the book, T.R.I.A.L.S, is really based on an acronym. So you have a different aspect, or maybe, I don't know what the word is, a different word signifying a different letter for, trials. So we have transparency for the T, we have responsibility for the R, intentionality for the I, A is appreciation, L is limits, and S is simplify. So according to the book, you're applying all of these to whatever the stress is in the different aspects of your life. Am I correct?
That is correct. And one of the interesting things or questions I've received a lot is, you must have overcome a whole lot of anxiety to have written a book about a journey from anxiety to peace. And really the T.R.I.A.L.S method is more about prevention than it is about getting out of it. It's what can we do to prepare ourselves to not have anxiety.
Right.
And so really that T, that transparency is fundamental in developing every relationship. And one of the things that the book kind of talks about is how that every bit of anxiety is something that's relative to a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you talk about your approach, I noticed that you are in the book talking about being proactive rather than reactive.
Yes.
So, and one of the things you say is that anxiety is a choice. Elaborate on that a little bit. I like that. I don't think we always think of it, because that's one thing the book does, is it simplifies, I think anyway, really kind of simplifies something that's rather complicated, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I've been ridiculed, is not the right word, but I've been cautioned about saying anxiety is a choice. And something that I went back and redid from the original print was I addressed the reader before they take on the book, is that anxiety is a choice in the sense of general anxiety. People that suffer through post-traumatic stress, those kinds of things that have chemical imbalances, the book doesn't address that at all, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician, psychiatrist, any of that.
Good point.
But what I do is I define stress and anxiety, stress being application of pressure to a person or an object. And
Yeah.
so a lot of stress comes to us that we can control, but a lot of it's outside of our control. And then anxiety is the way that we deal with the stress that we have in our life. So how do we choose to respond to the different stressors in life? Because if we choose to dwell on whatever stressor we have in our life, then anxiety is going to be a big part of that, or clinging to that, dwelling on it. And so the T.R.I.A.L.S method tries to prevent stress from becoming anxiety.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Jay.
Well, Chase, how does a person know, and I'm kind of jumping ahead because you brought that up, how you clarified that to the reader early on about more severe, I guess would be the word, cases of anxiety, but how would a person know that I'm no longer at this level where I can manage this myself with information from your book and other sources, but I need to seek professional help?
Sure. My advice would be this: if somebody's dealing with something they feel like is beyond their control, I think they need to go back to the idea of being transparent about that. Really, transparency leads into the responsibility and then the other parts of the acronym that Chris had just mentioned. But if somebody feels like something is beyond their control, they need to be transparent about whatever that is and find somebody they trust that they can talk to, whether it be a family member or a doctor or a psychologist, somebody that has an expertise in that field. For example, if it's related to military issues, or if it's related to emotional relationship issues, there are specialists that deal with those things that are beyond my scope of expertise if I have one. And so I would encourage them to do that.
So what might be advanced anxiety for me may not be the same for Chris. So what I might need to see a professional for may not be what Chris would see a professional for. Is that right?
That is absolutely
so it's personal.
Right. It is. And, personalities play a big role in the way things affect different people. And that's really one of the things that we address, or I think we will address in the discussion, about the idea of trying to be normal and then taking that and comparing ourselves to other people.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, you said that in the book. You said that, everybody, nobody has the perfect, I'm paraphrasing, of course, nobody has a perfect life. Nobody has it all together except the Joneses. Whoever
Right.
they are, they seem to have it all together. And
They're
we're
good.
always trying to compare ourselves and keep up with the Joneses. And I think that's one thing you said adds to our stress and our anxiety level, is that we're constantly looking around us and comparing ourselves with other people. And so that's going to add stress instead of just being content with what we have, right?
Absolutely. And it's something that I think helps us to understand, or something that helps us understand, is it's not new. It's not, well, when social media came about, then this problem started to exist.
Right.
One of my favorite quotes is Marcus Aurelius from 2,000 years ago, where he talks about how he's just amazed or perplexed that all men love themselves more than the rest of men, but set more value on the opinions of others than they do their own opinion of themselves.
Yeah, he shared that on Facebook, didn't he?
Yes, and absolutely.
I saw the
meme. but that's what we do, is we find somebody that set a standard of normal in every area of life, whether it's within our marriages or how we raise our kids or our finances. And we think, all right, if normal is this, what do I have to do to get to normal? And what we do is we start comparing ourselves to everybody around us. And when we don't measure up, then we put more stress on ourselves. Perhaps we take out a bigger loan, or we work more hours, and all that adds so much pressure to keep up with somebody. And it really destroys people from the inside out, because we don't tell people those things.
Yeah.
We keep that inside as we try to do that.
Yeah. So, before we jump into some of the subcategories you talked about in the book, some of the chapters, let's talk about just briefly the acronym. So the T, transparency. You alluded to that a while ago, but what you're getting at with the transparency is, if we are going to overcome some of the stresses in our lives and some of the anxiety, then we're going to have to be able to talk about it. We're going to have to be transparent. We're going to have, fellowship with others that we feel like we can trust to kind of share that burden with us, right?
Absolutely. One of the things I tell people all the time is secrets cause anxiety.
Yeah.
And so we can't, if we have secrets, we're not transparent.
Sure.
And every relationship needs that transparency if we want to avoid having anxiety within it.
And so the transparency part and the responsibility part have to go hand in hand. So once you've sought to be transparent, now you're seeking to be responsible and trying to do something about the stress and the anxiety. And that brings to intentionality. Explain that a little bit for us, because that's kind of a big word.
Sure. Every decision we make needs to have purpose behind it. And if whatever subcategory we look at, or as we look at them, take marriage, for example. I'm not going to wake up tomorrow. If today my marriage is on the rocks, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, wow, I have a perfect marriage. This is great. How did that happen? People that have a perfect marriage or a very good marriage, however you want to look at those terms, is because they chose to.
Yeah.
They decided every day that they were going to make the best decision possible so that they wouldn't have that anxiety within that relationship.
That's a good point. And so then comes the appreciation, which you just kind of alluded to as well. So you appreciate what you have. You mentioned one of the things that you mentioned in the book I really like is rethinking your circumstances, getting content with what you have instead of worrying about what you don't have. And so I think that's where the appreciation comes in, right?
Absolutely. Gratitude, having an attitude of gratitude is something I grew up with.
Yeah.
And whether you have a lot or whether you have a little, being thankful for what you have is ideal. And like you said, it's perspective, rethinking your circumstances. Benjamin Franklin, another one of my favorite quotes that I don't even know if it was in the book, maybe I read it afterwards, but he says that contentment makes poor men rich, but discontentment makes rich men poor.
Yeah.
And so when we learn to be content with what we have, that's wealth.
Sure. I like that. Mm-hmm. And so talk about limits. What do you mean by limits when we get to the L of trials?
Limits are the hardest thing for me. I think a lot of us want to be a yes man. Uh-huh. And so anytime somebody says, hey, can you do this? Yes. and a lot of times we go, well, I didn't even tell you when it was. Well, it doesn't matter. I want to do that. And so we like to say yes. Well, when we say yes to everything, we've got to know where our breaking point is. Because if we don't know when to say no, when our limits get pushed, that's going to put so much pressure on us. It's going to be hard to think about anything else except those stressors, which will then lead to anxiety. Again, the key to preventing anxiety is going to be knowing those stressors, knowing our limits, and then how to reduce them.
I really like that because I think that is something that when I talk to ministers, talk to young preachers, because I used to be a young preacher. I'm not anymore, but we do the preacher training camp at Oldham Lane and, but talking with other ministers and things like that, that's one thing that I have had to learn that was very difficult for me is one of the most important words in a preacher's vocabulary is no, because you will be stretched as far as you want to get stretched and people will use you up as much as you let them use you up and not even thinking about it really. They just, because they love you and they want to be around you or whatever. And so learning to say no, I think that's really good, having boundaries and limits. And then you have simplify. So talk a little bit about simplify. I like that, but tell us where you're coming from.
All right. To me, the transition between limits and simplifying is kind of what you had just talked about, knowing that word no, because every time we say yes to something, we're saying no to something else.
Good point.
And so the process of simplifying is understanding what is my best yes. And so if I have 5 different opportunities, like being on a podcast and then preaching at the same time and then doing another Bible study and then spending time with my kids, I've got to learn how many things I can do, how many things I can't do. So simplifying, to me, is kind of like fractions. When I'm teaching my kids how to do fractions and they see 32 over 16, their mind just can't comprehend, if they're 8, those numbers. But if I show them that that's the same as, 16 over 8 and then 8 over 40, the smaller we can make these projects we have in front of us. And when we decide, hey, I can't do that, simplifying is learning how to delegate some of our responsibilities to other people because there's people around us that want to help, that can help. If I say no to an opportunity, I say, but I can find somebody that can help you with that.
Yeah.
So the more we can simplify, the less pressure, the less stress we're going to have. Odds are that won't turn into anxiety.
I like how you said finding our best yes. What are the priorities? Where do they? Because, we get stressed over our schedule and we get stressed over the things on our daily activity list. But I mean, by and large, we we make out that list, or we devise that schedule. And so many times it's just about setting boundaries and simplifying, which, kind of brings me to something you said in the book as well. You said we can't change people, we can only change ourselves. And so at some point, am I wrong to say that it's okay to be selfish in this at some point? Because, you got to teach people how to treat you and kind of thing, and you've got to be able to draw those limits and those boundaries, right?
Yes. And in addition to that, as a minister, something I have learned, and my wife is so good to help me with this, we get asked to do so much. When you're responsible for a group of people, ministers' families take the hit more than any other group of people on a percentage basis, because we get asked to do so much, and we get asked to speak at different places or go to whatever it is, on top of the other extracurriculars we may have going. And if you want to have anxiety in your life, say yes to everybody but your family and see how quick it comes.
Yeah.
No doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Hey, Chase, in the beginning, I think it was even in the introduction of your book, you talk about Jesus's teaching on this from Matthew 6. And just in those few verses, 25 through 34, how he mentions the word, he uses the word worry, I think it was 6 times. And so I think your book, what you're sharing with people, this podcast series is really timely, anytime, but in particular now during this coronavirus pandemic. So, and then thinking about what Jesus is talking about there, these basic needs, and we're seeing panic over basic needs. So how would you speak to that and Jesus's teaching and the things that you're wanting to share when Jesus is saying, don't worry? I mean, so is he telling us don't prioritize, give no thought to it, procrastinate, don't care about? What is the message for us, and in particular during these times?
I think one of the things that is really helpful to keep in mind is what we started with about being proactive instead of reactive. If Jesus says, do not worry, he addresses some pretty specific things there in Matthew 6 about what we're going to eat, how we're going to clothe ourselves, and about our life, which encompasses so much. But one of the things that I love about Jesus' teaching and Paul's teaching is how they go hand in hand. Yeah. When you look at Philippians 4 and verse 6, where he says, be anxious for nothing, and you take that context through verse 19, where he says, and I know my God will supply all of your needs according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. What we have to do as Christians, as humans, I think a lot of times we'll see that whether people claim to be Christians or not, is there's always going to be a group of people who don't need financial help. That group of people always is going to exist. Their responsibility is to help those that have needs. And so there's helpers and there's people that need help. And as we look at this pandemic and this idea of people stressing about having food or having clothes, whatever it is, if we don't need help, we need to help other people. But the other aspect of that that's really important is those of us that don't need help, we need to be approachable and we need to be encouraging people. There's no shame in saying, hey, I need some help. Yeah. But we're at a time, I love the series you're going to do because you got guys coming in that are going to address topics about stress and anxiety that people need help with. Yeah. And people that have lived through it, that have that advice and experience to share with others is going to be invaluable.
You point out a word in that discussion in your book. You zero in on insecurity, and that being I think what you're saying is at the core of our anxiety and what Jesus is saying. And I think he's telling us, and I think this is what you're saying, is be secure in God, his kingdom, and his righteousness, and his love and provision.
That's right. And really, when you look at the perspective of food, clothing, shelter, those main things that are needs for people, we run into a lot of problems when we compare what we eat, how we dress, and how we live, what our house is. If our goal is to have the nicest clothes, to eat the nicest foods, and we compare what we can afford to do in those 3 areas versus what other people can or cannot afford to do, we're going to find ourselves in a bind. because I've read it before that comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that we've got to get over if we want to avoid anxiety, is comparing ourselves one to another.
So that's really interesting to connect what Jesus is teaching there in Matthew 6. Do not worry about these things. And this chasing normal, whatever normal is, and normal is a moving target. It changes. It is what the trends are. That's what normal is. What is common is normal. What is normal is common. I mean, even what social media platforms to use, how to use them, the do's and don'ts of how to use them, how often to post. I mean, it gets insane. What to wear. I mean, I can't even begin to keep up, with what I'm supposed to look like, have, do, enjoy. No one can. And so we look to social media and try to find what normal is and what the peers are. And as soon as you catch up, it's changed and you're behind again. And yet I'm supposed to not worry. So it's a recipe for disaster.
It is one of my favorite illustrations to do with people. I'm told not to do it with adults because they just won't participate. But when I deal with kids and I get to speak at a school or something about the book and the idea, one of the things I do to help them realize how much we do rely on normalcy and comparative living and the way that is perceived by other people is this. I'll have them put their heads down. I'll ask them two questions. The first question is, how many of you thought about what others would think about your clothes before you put them on this morning? And all the hands go up. Everybody's concerned about what everybody else thinks. I mean, the majority. And so then I have them put their hands down. I ask them this question. How many of you care what the people around you are wearing? No hands go up. And so I explained to them, look, you just told me none of you care what everybody else is wearing, but you let what you think everybody else is going to wear or care about your clothes determine what you're going to wear. And so
that's a great illustration. Yeah, I mean, I really think, this is something that's kind of come clearer to me over the years, I guess, as a minister and preaching on Matthew 6 and other passages like it, that worry and anxiety, we often treat it like a character flaw. We treat it like, we say, well, the Bible says, do not worry. Well, I am. Well, stop it. Well, I can't. Well, stop or you're going to hell. That's how we deal with worry. And it's like you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you just don't do it anymore. But we were made to feel we are emotional creatures. We were made this way. And some of us, have, like myself, we have heightened anxiety sometimes about certain things. I'm kind of a worrier about stuff. But at the same time, this is something that we feel. The emotion itself is not the sin, at least what I've come to, but it's how we deal with it. And worry and anxiety seems to me to be tied to devotion. Whatever it is that you're devoted to is what's going to cause you worry. And some things are good to be concerned about. I mean, Paul was concerned about the churches. I think it's good to be concerned about your finances. It's good to be concerned about your spiritual welfare and the spiritual welfare of your children. But when it consumes you, when it eats you up from the inside out is obviously when it's a problem. And, just for instance, with finances, you said that money doesn't make you rich, perception does, and possessions need purpose. And so I come to that when we're talking about worry and anxiety. It all comes down to a strategy. I've got to have a strategy because it's not that I'm never going to worry. It's not that I'm never going to feel anxiety. And when you read Matthew 6, the tone of Jesus is not condescension. The tone is not, hey, all of y'all are going to hell unless you figure this out. No, he understands that it's a problem, that it's something that we all deal with. How do you deal with it effectively? Tell me if I'm wrong there.
No, I think that's right. And I think the key in all of that is what Jesus does say there in Matthew 6. He says you can't serve two masters.
Yeah.
If you serve the one master, the other master, that whatever that other thing is, will take care of itself. If it's money that you're worried about, serve Jesus, money's going to be there.
Right.
And you're going to have that opportunity to work. Somebody's going to help you out. But if your focus is only on the other, you're either going to serve the creator or the creation.
Yeah.
And that creation can be so many different things.
Sure.
And so, no, it's definitely not one of those, hey, you're worried about this, you're going to hell. It's having a proper perspective of how much mental strength can I give or mental, energy can I give to a given thing without it causing me to not go back and think about how God's going to help me through this. How are God's people going to help me get through this? And I think that's one of the biggest things we've got to understand when it comes to anxiety and stress. It's not if you have more faith in God.
Yeah.
It's God doesn't expect you to only have faith in him. He expects you to have faith in his people,
Right.
so that you have that body to help you. That's what a family's there to do. And certainly one of the things I mentioned, we've got to be transparent with each other. We go to church so many times. Hey, how are you doing? And we have that big smiley face we put on. I'm good. How are you? Good. Great. Because we don't want others to think we need each other. We're all independent.
We got it backwards. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And if we learn to be transparent with everyone, say, you know what? I need some grocery money this week.
Yeah.
There aren't 300 people sitting around you who's going to give you $100 to go buy some groceries. Nobody wants anybody to be hungry. But again, part of that problem I think we see in a lot of relationships is I don't want people to know I can't buy my groceries, so I would rather go hungry than admit I needed help.
Yeah.
And we're going to be in a bind in more than one way if we do that.
Yeah. And I think, in all this, the overall overarching theme is being able to differentiate between, kind of churchy, pious platitudes kind of things and, an emotional or character flaw and really getting to the heart of the issue. I see it on church signs. We're too blessed to be depressed. All these memes on, social media that talk about how, we shouldn't worry and all. But yes, we do though. I mean, all that sounds fine and good, but we still worry. We still have an issue with stress and anxiety. You're not telling me how to hit it head on and how to deal with it. And I think Jesus does. I think you do in your book as you push people towards the scriptures and how to effectively identify the problem, but then how to deal with it as well, through faith, but also through faith in God's people. And I think that's great. So let's talk about some of the subcategories for just a few minutes. You talk about overcoming anxiety in marriage. One of the things you say is every single day we should wake up looking for ways to prepare ourselves to be better in our marriage. That's going to help eliminate stress. Talk a little bit about that.
So two things go with that really stick out. I think the trials, all 6 of those parts of the acronym are helpful in marriage. But every day when we wake up, if our goal is just to maintain good, we're going to fail. The goal needs to be, how can I make this better? And really one of the greatest comparisons I have found when it comes to marriage relationships is a mirror and a magnifying glass. When we look at relationships and the way that we treat people, we have one of two tools in hand. A lot of times when we have problems, what we have is that magnifying glass. And we look at the way that we're being treated and we analyze that and we determine how we're going to treat other people based on how we've been treated.
Yeah.
But if we'll hold up the mirror and we'll realize what God's done for us, and then out of that, we'll give what the other person needs, whether we think they deserve it or not, that's not our responsibility.
Right.
And so every day, my wife and I wake up and think, what can I do to make my marriage better? And one of the things I would encourage people to do is wake up and ask your spouse every single day, what can I do to make your day better today?
Yeah.
Whether it's one thing or whether she's got a list of 100, take your pick. We've got to be proactive because we don't want to wake up today and the spouse think, it's been a week since he's even asked me how I'm doing. Yeah. It's got to be proactively serving and really through every one of these subcategories, my go-to is if you want to avoid anxiety, you've got to serve it.
Yeah.
You've got to find a way to serve other people. Take the focus off yourself, and especially in your marriage, not what can she do for me, what can I do for her? Because if we want her to have that, what can I do for him?
Right.
She's going to need to see that in us first.
I like that. That's a good point because that kind of goes back to the submissiveness, and that concept. Yeah. And we often apply that to our spouse, our wife, but the Ephesians 5 is clear. We submit as well. And if we're submitting to Christ like we should, we're going to serve and we're going to take care of her the way that we should. How about faith and anxiety? That's another subcategory. We often do with fear what we do with worry, right? The Bible says over and over again, do not fear. So if you're afraid, you're sinning. And you say, do not fear. And you're saying, well, I do. Well, stop. I can't. Well, then you're sinning, and now I'm fearful of going to hell on top of everything else. Mm-hmm. So we often do the same thing. Talk about fear and stress and how those tie together and how we can eliminate or at least lessen the anxiety attached to our fears.
And fear is one of those things that are so debilitating. And to me, it goes hand in hand with doubt. Yeah. And when we think about the concept of our faith, I think the two greatest tools that Satan uses against us are fear and doubt. Yeah. He makes us think, was I baptized for the right reasons? Did I know enough whenever I did that? Wow, they want me to work on this project. I'm just not sure if it's going to work out. Am I going to be wasting my time? And we start to doubt so many things. And God's given us tools and people that can help us do unimaginable things. I mean, Ephesians 3 tells us whatever you can imagine, he's capable of much more.
Sure.
But when it comes to faith, I think one of the biggest things I've learned is that from the time I was a kid, I learned all of the right Bible verses, and my parents taught me the truth, and I trusted them, and I still trust them. But until you leave your house and your faith, question your faith, I think a lot of times, and I think it's good for people to question their faith.
Absolutely.
And we've got to go to the Bible. That's got to be the source, and hopefully the people that helped us develop our faith came at it from that point of this is the source of truth. And so develop your faith based on that. Well, somebody says this, well, if you think something's different or you doubt something, dig into that book. Don't dig into another one.
Right.
And so trying to find your own, and certainly as we deal with trials in life, people's faith is going to change in the next few months. There are going to be people that have a lot stronger relationship with God, and there are going to be some that have a weaker relationship with God as a result.
True.
But when it comes to anxiety and faith, I think one of the ways we can distinguish between these two is it's not so much what we believe, but it's what we do with what we believe.
Right.
And so the idea behind it's more faithfulness than it is just faith.
I like that.
Am I going to be faithful to God in these circumstances? Not what do I believe about God, but it's about what am I doing with what I believe and how that builds relationships with other people.
Very good.
Chase, you made me think of something that I haven't thought of in that way before, related to how now we're all assembling virtually for worship services, Bible study. So the family at home has a challenge. I could sleep in or kick back on the couch or throw the ball in the backyard or do something else. And that it's easier to not assemble when all I got to do is go sit on my couch and turn on the TV, the social media, and watch the live stream, participate in that. And so faithfulness and strengthening our faith during this time that we're in, and the relationship to anxiety, I think is really important. So don't miss the opportunity to assemble, even though we're scattered, and keep your faith strong, grow in your faith. And what we're pushing, I know at Oldham Lane and probably everyone else is fathers, parents, take this opportunity to read the Bible, do family devotionals with your family. You know what? It's me and my wife singing, telling our kids to sing, and she sounds good and I don't, but that's that it is what it is. I mean, are we not going to do it? And what are our children going to remember? What impression does that make on our children? Or we're going to sleep in instead of do it. So I think there's something there in this time of virtual assembly as well when it comes to our faith.
I mean, what a great opportunity for men who maybe feel like I can't be a leader. I can't pray publicly. I can't teach a public. What a great opportunity to start in a small group in your home.
Yeah.
And teach your kids, okay, I can do this. Not that I have loved so much the aspect of this pandemic in that ministers are posting their lessons. I've learned a tremendous amount. I've become better friends with people, perspective changing lessons, and they're not all about the pandemic.
Yeah.
The lessons cover such a variety of topics that everybody's got a different perspective. And I really hope that men take advantage of it, and women too, in teaching their kids. I mean, it's a group effort. But I'm sure there are some that are thinking, how are my kids going to get spiritually fed for the next couple of months? And you're it.
Yeah.
And this is your time to shine, moms and dads,
Yeah.
to help your kids see. And man, if you've got teenagers in the house, wow, what a great opportunity to put them into, hey, next week the Devo's yours, next week the Bible lesson's yours. And they're not in school. They've got time right now to prepare themselves spiritually. Not, again, am I going to heaven or hell because of what we're doing, but you've got to grow, and what a great opportunity to grow and serve in that capacity.
Absolutely. As we kind of wind things down, Chase, I did want to get to the grief and anxiety part of the book, because that's the real basis of this podcast series that we're doing, called Good Grief, talking about dealing with grief from a spiritual perspective and dealing with grief with God on your side. Of course, we know that sometimes loss can cause us to turn away from God. Some people turn away from God in that moment. I personally don't know how, some folks get through things without God on their side, but I know that there are some who've really experienced terrible loss, and, I somewhat understand why they cry out to God, blame God. Certainly we have scriptures that tell us of people that ask God why, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But talk about grief and anxiety. One of the things you said that it really hit me was there is no standard for grief, but there is for anxiety. Talk a little bit about that.
The idea behind that quote, and it was something that I bold-faced in the book in a little square because I thought it was really important, is that it goes back to the idea of comparing ourselves to other people. There is no normal for the way that we handle grief.
Right.
And kind of like Jacob mentioned earlier, is that, he and I could both lose a brother or a sister or family, whatever that is, and we're going to respond differently because of personality, because of other experiences we've had, because of influences of others, or whatever that may be. So there is no standard. Some people may want to lock themselves up for 2 weeks and not talk to anybody. And whether that's healthy or not, it's not really for us always to decide.
Right.
And so trying to figure out, all right, how do I prevent my grief the way my cards have been dealt to me? How do I prevent that loss, whatever it is, from turning into anxiety? How do I get over the hump of not only dwelling on that? And to me, the key is preparation. We prepare for everything in life. We prepare for marriage. We prepare for jobs. We prepare for schooling. We prepare for finances. It makes sense if we want to be successful, so to speak, if I can use that word, in other areas of life. Why would we not want to be successful, so to speak, when we have grief? I mean, to me, grief needs to be handled, and we're all going to handle it differently, but we need to handle it in such a way so that we can move forward, not moving on, not if we lose somebody, forgetting about that, but being able to take that experience of grief and serving other people with it, because nobody's going to suffer alone. Yeah. And so when we have grief, even the few times that the grandparents I've lost, the way that I chose to deal with that, and I planned ahead of time, is how can I serve the people that are grieving with me? How can I serve the people, and it's not who's grieving the most, but that we're all experiencing in some capacity that grief. What can I do to help other people get through this? Because when we do that, if that's the example we set and other people will do that, everybody's helping everybody get through that experience.
Yeah. How much, I think maybe you were going to ask this, I think I saw in your notes, but about prayer. I mean, what role does prayer play in all this? I mean, how important, I think we know, but talk a little bit about that.
So when I think about prayer, I go to James 1, and not relate. He's not talking about grief. He's talking about wisdom. But if we pray for something, we better believe that God's going to answer that prayer, that God's going to give us what we're asking for. And conforming our life or our will to his will, I think, is key in understanding prayer and how that helps us get through grief and anxiety. Because I can pray, make my circumstances as good as it can possibly be for me and what I want. Again, when we go back to how I want things, then we're putting that pressure on us, and that's going to most times turn into anxiety. And so whatever it is we feel like we're looking for as we pray for those things, I think as long as we're praying, if it be your will that this happens, then great, that's what I want. But if that's not your will for me to get what I want out of this, just like Jesus prayed, not what I will, but what your will be done.
Yeah.
And then understand, and a big part of prayer, and in that prayer chapter that I wrote, there's so many people that don't know how to pray. And I don't mean that they need to use better words. I mean, they genuinely don't know how to have a conversation with God, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because when you think about worldly people right now, people outside the church that maybe come to the church, and I think about our Spanish church, I've had people come in and they're converted, and I've studied with them for several years. And then I'll ask one of them, hey, would you feel comfortable leading a public prayer? No, I don't know how. Mm-hmm. For us as Christians, it's so common. It's just like having a conversation. But for people that didn't grow up hearing prayers all the time, and so when we don't know how to pray, how's that going to benefit us when we're dealing with grief? We as ministers and as other, as family members, we need to teach other people how to pray. And that's one of the things I try to address in the book, because if I tell you don't worry about stuff, but go and pray, and then I don't at least address how to pray or some things to do to help you out with prayer, I'm not doing you any services.
Yeah, absolutely. Chase, I think the book is great. I think it's a good tool to equip folks in dealing with stress and dealing with anxiety. Tell folks where they can find the book.
All right. Yes. Thank you. You can get the book on Amazon. And I was telling Chris earlier, this is the first book that was written. T.R.I.A.L.S, A Journey from Peace and Anxiety. You can look for my name or the title. But anybody right now that's at home that wants some material, I've got a workbook that was put out also. And you can contact him. My email is chase@trialsbook.com. I will email you for free a digital copy of that book. If that'll help you spark some discussion in your home, maybe on Sundays or Wednesdays, or if you're doing small groups, be happy to send it to you to help you out.
That's great. And I would say to our viewers, our listeners, that if you have a question, you can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Chase, then certainly we'll pass it on to him. And we just appreciate you tuning in. We hope it has been helpful. We know that there are a lot of folks, especially at this time in our world, that are dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. But truth is, we don't always need a pandemic. Most of us deal with stress and anxiety on a regular basis. And so if you'd like more tips, suggestions from Chase, or if you'd like to, get a hold of the book and, maybe work through the workbook, and you need that information that Chase gave, again, hopefully we put that on the screen, but we can also, get that information to you and just share the podcast, spread the news about Dear Church, and hopefully you'll be tuning in, week out here, especially during this series. And I think it's going to hit a lot of folks that are dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety. So Chase, thank you so much for being with us. And God bless you and your ministry going forward and your wonderful family. And just thank you so much for what you're doing. And for everybody that's watching and or listening, thank you. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.